The human heart is a four-chambered structure. There are two atria and there are two ventricles. The two atria, that is the right and the left atrium, are on the superior aspect of the heart. They're separated from one another by a structure called the interatrial septum, which is unfortunately not shown in this diagram. The two ventricles, that is the right and the left ventricles, are located on the inferior aspect of the heart, and they are separated from one another by a structure that's called the interventricular septum. So let's begin by examining the atria. These are collectively the receiving chambers of the heart because they are receiving blood from the major veins like the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the pulmonary veins. Recall that the veins are always structures that are returning blood to the heart. The atria are smaller than the ventricles because they don't have to push blood very far. We see, as I mentioned earlier, that we have a right atrium and a left atrium. The auricles are small wrinkled appendages that are found on the inferior side of each atrium, and they function to increase the atrial volume just a little bit. Interiorly, we see that the right atrium has small folds of muscle that are called the pectinate muscles. These are thought to help increase the volume in the right atrium as the right atrium fills. Another structure that we see in the right atrium is the fossa ovalis, and this is a small oval-shaped indentation that's actually located in the walls of the interatrial septum. The fossa ovalis is the remnant of a structure that's called the foramen ovale, which is a small opening between the right and the left atrium of the fetal heart that helps blood in the fetal cardiovascular system bypass the pulmonary circuit. So during fetal development, the lungs are not yet being used as gas exchange structures, so this means that most of the blood in the pulmonary circuit can be shunted away from the lungs to other structures. In this image of a dissected right atrium, we see the pectinate muscles as well as the fossa ovalis, although here in this image it's called the oval fossa. There are three veins that drain their blood into the right atrium. So recall that the atria being the receiving chambers means that only veins, which are returning blood to the heart, will drain into them. The first of these veins that drains its blood into the right atrium is the superior vena cava. The remaining two are the inferior vena cava and the coronary sinus. There are four veins that drain into the left atrium, the two right pulmonary veins and the two left pulmonary veins, which gives us our four veins total that are delivering blood from the lungs back to the left atrium. So it was fairly difficult to trace the path of the right pulmonary veins in the previous diagram. However, if we turn the heart around and look at the posterior side of the heart, we see that both sets of these veins enter the heart in almost the exact same place. Turning our attention to the ventricles for a moment, recall that the ventricles we refer to as the pumping chambers because they are responsible for pushing blood into the large arteries of the body. The walls of the ventricles are much thicker and much more muscular than the atria because the ventricles have to push blood further than the atria do, and the ventricles have to push blood against the resistance of all of the resistance of that blood flow in the arteries. There are a few features found in the walls of the ventricles that we don't happen to see in the atria. The first are a set of structures called the trabeculae carnii, which means crossbars of flesh, and these are little bars of flesh that line the ventricle walls. The trabeculae carnii are structures that reduce the suction that is created when the ventricles contract. The second structure that we see are the papillary muscles, which help to control the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves that are found between the atria and the ventricles. The papillary muscles help to anchor structures called the cordae tendinii, which means the tendinous cords that originate from the valves that are located between the the right atrium and right ventricle and the left atrium and the left ventricle. So when the ventricles contract, the papillary muscles will also contract, and they will put tension on the chordae tendineae. The cords will prevent the bicuspid and tricuspid valves from being forced back into the atria when the ventricles contract and generate pressure. So when the right ventricle contracts, it's going to push blood into a structure called the pulmonary trunk, which will branch into the right and left pulmonary arteries to take blood to the lungs. When the left ventricle contracts, it will push blood into an artery called the aorta, which is the main systemic artery that's going to take blood to all of the systemic blood vessels that don't include the lungs.